Story 1. The crying cargo. I've been driving 18-wheelers for 23 years, and I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. But that night in November 2019, I picked up a load that still haunts my dreams. If you hear crying coming from your trailer at 3 in the morning and you're hauling furniture, you don't investigate. You just don't. I wish someone had told me that before I opened those doors. The job came through at the last minute. I was sitting at a truck stop outside Amarillo, nursing my third coffee and wondering if I'd make rent that month when my dispatcher called. Emergency pickup, double the usual rate, no questions asked. The client was some estate sale company liquidating an old mansion outside of Plainview. They needed everything moved to a storage facility in Arkansas by morning. The pay was too good to refuse, even though every instinct in my gut told me to hang up that phone. I arrived at the property around midnight. The mansion loomed against the starless sky like a rotting tooth. Victorian style, probably built in the 1890s, with windows that looked like empty eye sockets staring down at me. A nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit met me at the gate. He couldn't have been more than 30, but his hair was already going gray at the temples. He handed me the paperwork without making eye contact and practically ran back to his BMW. Before I could ask any questions, that should have been my first clue. The loading crew worked in complete silence. 6 men, all of them avoiding each other's eyes, moving like they were in a funeral procession. They loaded antique furniture, oil paintings in gilded frames, trunks and wooden crates that looked older than my grandfather. One crate in particular caught my attention. It was different from the others, made of black walnut with iron bands, and it had words carved into it in a language I didn't recognize. When they loaded it onto my trailer, it made a sound, a wet, heavy thud that furniture just doesn't make. I started to ask about it, but the foreman cut me off with a look that could freeze gasoline. I pulled out of there at 1:30 in the morning, eager to put miles between me and that house of horrors. The first hour was fine. Had the radio on, some talk show about UFOs, and I was making good time on Highway 287. Then just past Childress, the radio started acting up. Static, then voices speaking backwards, then this high-pitched whine that made my teeth hurt. I switched it off and drove in silence, which is when I heard it, crying. Soft at first, like a child sobbing in the distance. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a loose strap creating some kind of resonance. But as the minutes ticked by, the crying got louder. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was several, all crying in harmony, if you can call it that. Men, women, children, all weeping together in my trailer. At 3:15, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled over at a rest area, grabbed my flashlight, and walked around to the back of the trailer. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the lock open. The crying stopped the moment I touched the door handle. Everything went silent, not even the usual highway sounds, just dead, suffocating silence. I opened those doors and the smell hit me first. Not decay exactly, but something old and wrong, like air that hadn't moved in a century. I shined my light inside and everything looked normal. Furniture, crates, paintings, all secured properly. But that black walnut crate, the one with the iron bands, it was different. The wood was wet. Not damp, but wet, like something was seeping through it. And in the beam of my flashlight, I could see handprints on the inside of the trailer walls. Small handprints, like children had been pressing their palms against the metal, trying to get out. That's when I saw her. Standing between a wardrobe and a stack of chairs, partially hidden in shadow, was a little girl in a white nightgown. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Her hair hung in front of her face, and she was absolutely motionless. I started to ask her how she got in there, if she was okay, but before I could get the words out, she tilted her head up. Where her eyes should have been, there were just hollow, black voids, and she smiled at me with too many teeth. I slammed those doors shut and ran back to my cab like the devil himself was on my heels. I drove the rest of that night doing 90 miles an hour, breaking every speed limit between Texas and Arkansas. The crying started up again around dawn, but this time it was different. This time they were crying my name, over and over in those hollow, echoing voices. Michael, Michael, why did you leave us, Michael? I delivered that load at 6 in the morning. The warehouse crews seemed to be expecting trouble because they had a priest with them. A actual priest in full vestments, holding a Bible and a bottle of what I assume was holy water. They unloaded my trailer in 15 minutes flat, working with a desperate efficiency that told me they'd done this before. The black walnut crate went onto a dolly by itself, handled with thick gloves and wrapped in chains. As they wheeled it away, I swear I heard scratching from inside it. The estate company paid me in cash with an extra $1,000 thrown in. Hush money, I realized later. They also made me sign an NDA thicker than my logbook. I took the money and drove straight home, where I didn't sleep for 3 days. Here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. 2 weeks later, I was going through my truck doing maintenance, and I found something wedged behind my seat. A photograph, old and faded, showing that same Victorian mansion. But in the photograph, standing in every window, were faces. Dozens of pale faces, all staring at the camera. And in the front window, clear as day, was that little girl in the white nightgown. Written on the back in handwriting that looked like it came from another century were the words, "The Collection, 1887. I burned that photograph, but I can still see it when I close my eyes. I quit taking emergency loads after that. Hell, I almost quit trucking altogether, because now I know that some cargo isn't meant to be moved. Some things should stay buried, locked away, forgotten. And some loads, no matter how much they pay you, you should never, ever pick up. If you're a driver and someone offers you double rate for a no questions asked load, especially from an old estate, do yourself a favor. Say no. Your life and possibly your soul are worth more than any paycheck. Trust me on this. Story 2. The passenger. They say you should never pick up hitchhikers. Every trucker knows this. It's rule number 1, written in blood and bad experiences across 1,000 highways. But on that freezing February night in Montana, when I saw him standing by the roadside with his thumb out and snow coming down like the end of the world, I broke that rule, and I've been paying for it ever since. Let me back up. The load I picked up that day seemed innocent enough. Medical supplies from a pharmaceutical warehouse in Seattle heading to hospitals across the Midwest. Legal, legitimate, temperature-controlled. I'd done 100 runs just like it. But this one came with special instructions. Avoid Interstate 90 through Montana. Take the back roads instead. When I asked why, my dispatcher got cagey. Said something about construction and weight limits. Looking back, I think he knew something. I think they all knew. So there I was on Highway 200, somewhere between Great Falls and Lewistown, in the middle of a blizzard that came out of nowhere. Visibility was maybe 20 feet, and my rig was crawling along at 30 miles per hour. The radio had given up on me an hour back, nothing but static, and the occasional burst of what sounded like someone reading numbers in monotone. The isolation was complete. Just me, the snow, and the darkness pressing in from all sides. That's when my headlights caught him. A man standing on the shoulder wearing what looked like a hospital gown under a thin jacket. No hat, no gloves, just standing there in sub-zero temperatures with his arm out, thumb extended. My first instinct was to keep driving. But he looked straight at me, and even through the snow I could see his face. He was hypothermic, shaking violently, lips blue. If I left him there, he'd be dead within the hour. I hit the brakes and pulled over. He was at my passenger door before I'd even put the truck in park, which should have been my second warning. The first was the special route. He climbed in without a word, bringing a wave of cold air that smelled like antiseptic and something else, something chemical and wrong. Up close, I could see he was in his 40s, gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes that didn't quite focus. The hospital gown under his jacket was stained with something dark. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. "You don't know what this means. I've been trying to get away from there for so long." I asked him where there was, and he just smiled. Not a grateful smile, but something that made my skin crawl. "The facility," he said. "Back up the road. About 15 miles. You didn't see it?" I told him I hadn't seen anything but snow. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he already knew. "Good," he whispered. "That means they haven't found me yet. But they will. They always do." I should have stopped right there and put him back out in the snow. But part of me, the part that's kept me human after all these years on the road, felt sorry for him. He was clearly disturbed, probably escaped from some kind of psychiatric hospital. I figured I'd drive him to the next town and let the authorities sort it out. We drove in silence for about 10 minutes. Then he started talking. "You're carrying something," he said, not looking at me, just staring straight ahead through the windshield. "In the back, something that shouldn't be moved. Did they tell you what's really in those boxes?" I assured him it was just medical supplies, insulin and antibiotics, nothing exciting. He laughed at that, a sound like glass breaking. "Medical supplies," he repeated. "Is that what they called it? Did they also tell you to avoid the main highway? Did they tell you to drive at night? Did they tell you about the others?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What others?" He finally turned to look at me, and in the dim light from the dashboard, I could see that his eyes were wrong. The pupils were too large, black pools that seemed to swallow the light. "The other drivers," he said softly. "The ones who took this route before you. The ones who didn't make it. There are 47 vehicles along this stretch of road, did you know that? Buried in the snow and the ravines and the forests. And all of them were carrying the same thing you are." I told him he was crazy, that he needed help, that we'd be in town soon and I'd take him to a hospital, but he just shook his head. "You can't take me to town," he said, "because we're not going to make it to town." None of them did. The load won't allow it. That's when I heard it, a sound from the trailer behind us. A rhythmic thumping, like something heavy shifting around back there, but that was impossible. Everything was strapped down, secured. I'd checked it myself. My passenger heard it too. His face went pale, paler than it already was. "It's a wake," he whispered. "Oh God, it's a wake. You drove too long. You weren't supposed to drive more than 4 hours without stopping." Didn't they tell you that? Nobody had told me anything about 4-hour limits. The thumping got louder, more insistent, and then through the mirror I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. The trailer was moving, not swaying with the road, but bulging, like something enormous was pressing against it from the inside. My passenger started praying in a language I didn't recognize. The thumping became pounding, and I could hear metal groaning. "Stop the truck," he said urgently. "Stop the truck right now and run. It's the only way." That's what I did. I was driving this route 6 months ago. I stopped and ran, and I've been out here ever since trying to warn the others, but nobody listens. Nobody ever listens. The trailer gave a violent lurch. In my mirror, I saw one of the doors buckle outward. Or whatever was in there, it was strong enough to tear through reinforced steel. I should have stopped. I should have run like he said, but panic made me stupid. I hit the accelerator instead. We were doing 60 on a snow-covered mountain road when the trailer doors exploded outward. I don't know how else to describe it. They just burst open, metal screaming, and something came out. I only saw it for a second in the mirror before I lost control of the truck. It was tall, impossibly tall, and it moved like smoke, like shadow, like something that had no business existing in this world. The truck went into a skid. My passenger was screaming something, still in that strange language. The last thing I remembered before we hit the guardrail was looking in the mirror one more time and seeing that thing reaching toward us with appendages that were too long, too many, too wrong. I woke up in a hospital in Lewistown 3 days later. They told me I'd been in an accident, that my truck had gone off the road. They found me in the cab, alone, suffering from hypothermia and a concussion. No passenger, no trailer. When I asked about the load, about what was in the back, they looked at each other with expressions I couldn't read. Then they told me to rest, that I'd been through a trauma. But here's what they didn't tell me. I found out later from a nurse who'd had too much coffee and not enough sleep. They found my truck, but the trailer was completely empty. Every single box was gone. And in the snow around the crash site, there were tracks. Footprints leading away into the forest, hundreds of them. All in different sizes, all barefoot, all heading in the same direction, back toward that facility that doesn't appear on any map. I can't drive anymore. Every time I get behind the wheel, I hear that thumping. I see those doors buckling. And sometimes late at night, I wonder if my passenger was real or if he was something else. A warning, maybe, or a preview of what I'm becoming. The pharmaceutical company paid me a settlement to keep quiet. Another NDA, another stack of hush money. But I'm telling you now, whoever's listening, if someone offers you a route with special instructions, routes that avoid main roads, routes that can't be explained, turn it down. Because some loads aren't medical supplies, some loads aren't cargo at all, some loads are prisons, and you don't want to be driving when whatever's locked inside decides to break free. Story 3, the delivery to nowhere. I've made deliveries to some strange places in my 15 years of trucking. Remote farms, abandoned warehouses, military installations that don't officially exist. But nothing prepared me for the delivery I made last October. The destination was an address that shouldn't exist, and what I found there proved that some places are empty for a reason. The job came through a freight broker I'd never worked with before. Single pallet, refrigerated, overnight delivery from Portland to a location in rural Oregon. The payout was obscene, $5,000 for what should have been a 4-hour drive. When I asked what I was hauling, they said it was medical research materials, and that time was critical. The pickup was at a nondescript building near the industrial district. No signage, no windows, just a loading dock and an address. The client who met me there was a woman in her 60s, wearing a lab coat over expensive clothes. She had the look of someone who hadn't slept in days. While her crew loaded the pallet, a single white container about the size of a coffin, she handed me a sealed envelope. "Open this when you're 30 minutes from the delivery point," she said. "Follow the instructions exactly. Don't deviate. Don't stop. Don't look in the container. And for God's sake, don't be late." The urgency in her voice should have tipped me off, but $5,000 buys a lot of ignored instincts. I loaded up and hit the road around 10 p.m., heading southeast into the mountains. The first 2 hours were routine. Good weather, clear roads, GPS showing me right on schedule. Then I hit the 30-minute mark and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive paper. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. "When you reach coordinates 44.7234, minus 118, 9,876, your GPS will stop working. This is normal. Continue south for exactly 12.3 miles. You'll see a dirt road marked by 3 white stones. Turn left. Follow the road until you reach a gate. The code is 1887. Deliver the container to the building beyond the gate. Leave it on the loading dock. Do not enter the building. Do not speak to anyone you might see. Leave immediately. You have a 4-hour window from the time you enter the property. After 4 hours, the road out will close." This is not a metaphor. I read that note 3 times, and each time it made less sense. Coordinates instead of an address. A GPS that would stop working. A time limit that sounded like a threat. I should have turned around right there. But I'd come this far, and that $5,000 was already spent in my mind. Rent and bills, and maybe some left over for the first vacation I'd had in 3 years. Sure enough, at exactly those coordinates, my GPS flickered and died. Phone signal gone too. I was suddenly driving blind through mountain wilderness with nothing but my odometer and my wits. I counted off the miles. 12.3 exactly, and there it was. 3 white stones, each about 3 feet tall, standing by a dirt road that my headlights barely penetrated. I turned onto that road and everything changed. The temperature dropped about 20 degrees. My breath started fogging despite the heater running full blast. And the trees, they were wrong. I've driven through forests all over this country, but these trees were different. Too tall, too straight, too uniform. And they were absolutely silent. No wind, no animals, no night sounds at all. The road went on for miles, winding deeper into those silent woods. I started seeing things at the edge of my headlights. Shapes moving between the trees. Figures standing just beyond the light, watching. I told myself it was deer or shadows or my imagination. But deep down I knew better. The gate appeared suddenly, a massive thing made of black iron with symbols welded into it. They looked religious, but not from any religion I recognized. I punched in the code 1887, and the gate swung open soundlessly. Beyond it, the road continued for another half-mile before ending at a clearing. In the center of that clearing stood a building. Not a warehouse, not a laboratory, but something that looked like it had been there for centuries. Stone walls covered in moss, narrow windows like arrow slits, a loading dock that seemed to have been added as an afterthought. The whole structure radiated wrongness. It hurt to look at. The angles weren't quite right. The proportions made my eyes water. I backed my trailer up to the loading dock, every instinct screaming at me to floor it and get out of there. But I needed to unload that container. I needed to complete the job. I opened the trailer, and that's when I noticed the temperature gauge on the refrigeration unit. It had been set to 34 degrees Fahrenheit, standard for medical materials. But the readout showed -40. The unit couldn't even go that low. It was physically impossible. The container was covered in frost. Not normal frost, but patterns that looked almost like writing, like something had been drawing on it from the inside. I used the pallet jack to wheel it onto the loading dock, and as I did, I heard something from inside the container. A whisper, soft and pleading. "Let me out, please. It's so cold. Let me out." My hands froze on the pallet jack handle. The voice came again, clearer this time. A young woman crying. "Help me. Please help me. I don't want to go in there. Don't leave me here." I should have walked away. The note said, "Don't open it, don't look, just deliver and leave." But that voice was so desperate, so human. I reached for the latch on the container. The loading dock door opened. Not rolled up, not pulled, it just suddenly wasn't closed anymore. And standing in the doorway was a man, if you could call him that. He was impossibly tall, had to be 8 feet, wearing what looked like surgical scrubs from another era. His face was hidden behind a mask, the kind plague doctors used to wear, with a long beak and glass eye ports. He tilted his head looking at me, and I heard that voice again, but this time it was coming from him. "Thank you for the delivery," he said, but his mouth didn't move. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. He reached out with gloved hands and took the pallet jack from me. His movements were wrong, too fluid, too smooth. "You should leave now," the voice continued. "You have 3 hours and 42 minutes remaining." I didn't need to be told twice. I ran back to my truck, fired up the engine, and started driving, but as I pulled away I made the mistake of looking in my mirror. The building's windows were lit up now and I could see inside them. Rows of containers just like the one I delivered. Dozens of them. And standing among them were more of those tall figures in plague doctor masks, moving with that same liquid grace. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the faces I saw in those containers. Pressed against the frost-covered glass, mouths open in silent screams, and I recognized some of them. Missing persons I'd seen on the news. People who'd vanished without a trace. All of them trapped in those frozen boxes. All of them delivered by drivers like me who were too desperate or too stupid to ask questions. I made it back to the gate with an hour to spare. As I drove through, I looked back one last time. The road I'd just driven on was gone. Just forest, thick and impenetrable, like there'd never been a road there at all. The 3 white stones were still visible, but in the moonlight I could see they weren't stones. They were markers. Graves. The $5,000 was wired to my account the next morning. I haven't touched it. I can't. Every time I think about spending it, I see those faces in the containers. I hear that woman's voice begging to be let out. I see that thing in the plague doctor mask thanking me for my delivery. I reported it to the police, but they couldn't find anything. No building, no road, no coordinates matching what I'd written down. They treated me like I'd had some kind of mental breakdown. Maybe I did. Maybe that's easier to believe than the alternative. But I know what I saw. I know what I delivered. And I know that somewhere in those mountains that building is still there. Still accepting deliveries. Still collecting. And somewhere out there another driver is getting a call about an urgent overnight delivery. Great pay, no questions asked, and they're going to take it, just like I did. If you're that driver, if someone offers you a job that seems too good to be true, with strange instructions and coordinates instead of addresses, please, turn it down. Some deliveries aren't about moving cargo. Some deliveries are about feeding something that should have stayed hungry. And once you make that delivery, once you see what's really happening, you can never unsee it. The money's not worth it. Nothing is worth carrying that weight for the rest of your life. Knowing that you helped them, knowing that somewhere in a frozen box in a building that doesn't exist, someone is suffering because you needed to make rent. I haven't driven since that night. Every time I try, I see those 3 white stones. I hear that voice. "Let me out, please, it's so cold." And I wonder how many other drivers are out there, living with the same nightmare. Bound by NDAs and hush money and the terrible knowledge that we're all complicit in something we can't stop and can't escape. If you enjoyed these stories, please like, subscribe, and share your own trucker horror experiences in the comments below. Have you ever picked up a load that gave you bad vibes? Have you seen something on the RD that you can't explain? Let me know, and your story might be featured in the next video. Stay safe out there, drivers. And remember, some loads are better left unpicked.